Hello and welcome to Classic Motorsport Podcast. I'm Gareth Thomas, and today we're looking at the crazy and era-defining battle that was the 1976 Formula One season. That was full of controversy, mayhem, and all sorts that happened during the season. So, with this podcast, obviously everyone in the off-season thinking Emerson Woodward in McLaren versus Niki Lauda in a Ferrari once again. But in late 1975, Fittipaldi quit McLaren and went straight to Copper Supercar, which was the Fittipaldi team that he and his brother Wilson set up. So, McLaren needed a new driver, so they signed up James Hunt. And the deal was brokered by Marlboro's John Hogan. And the season of 76 was the most controversial and dramatic, as I said, in the history of Formula One. The 76 season had 16 rounds, starting off from the 25th of January in Brazil, all the way down to the 24th of October in Fuji, Japan. Rounds include Scandinavian Raceway in Sweden, the Luxurious of Monaco, a new venue at Long Beach, and lots more. But organising a Canada was more of a challenge than originally thought. The season opener was slated to have been in Buenos Aires, Argentina, at the Juan Oscar Galvez circuit. But that was cancelled due to economic and political reasons. Long Beach hosted its first Grand Prix on the 28th of March. The Spanish Grand Prix was moved permanently to Huama from 76 onwards. This was done after 5 spectators were killed in the 1975 Spanish Grand Prix at Montjuic Park. I explained in a previous Classic Motorsport podcast video about Montjuic and the disaster on that. The Belgian Grand Prix was originally supposed to be slated at Nevers because they were supposed to be alternating with Zolder, but the track surface at Nevers had deteriorated and Zolder would host the 76 race. Canada returned to the calendar, but it was cancelled in 1975 because Labatt's and Molson, two rival breweries, wanted to sponsor the race, and that caused the cancellation. Not the only time in the history of F1. 1987 was another example. And Japan hosted its first Grand Prix in 1976 in a 3-year deal, hosting at Fuji Speedway, although they would cancel 1978 after another situation which I will go to maybe a future episode. At the season opening Brazilian Grand Prix, Hunt put the car on pole, but it was Clay Regazzoni that led at the get-go before being passed later on by Lauda. Hunt was running second when his throttle jammed wide open and crashed, causing Jean-Pierre Jarier's shadow to slide on the oil left by Hunt and crash as well. Lauda went on to win the race. In South Africa, Hunt was again on pole, but Lauda went on to win the race. But there was more controversy and here when they came to South Africa, and that was with the Surtees team. Prior to the season, John Surtees was basically trying to find new sponsorship, and he was approached by the London Rubber Company, and they decided to get sponsorship deal with Durex. Yes, Durex is the condom company that would sponsor the Surtees team. Although there was a few people talking in South Africa, it wasn't till the Race of Champions that it became a real issue. The Race of Champions was a non-championship race. The late Murray Walker said in his autobiography, as far as the BBC were concerned, a visible Durex logo was totally acceptable for family viewing. Obviously, everybody was thinking, think of the children. Walker arrived at Brands Hatch on race day for the non-championship Race of Champions, to be greeted by BBC producer Ricky Tillin with the words. Tillin said, "Hi Murray, we'll know by 11 a.m. whether we'll be on the air or not." Walker replied, "What are you talking about, Ricky?" Tillin said, "Durex, we're not going to transmit the race unless Surtees agree to take it off their cars." Surtees did not, and the BBC backed off home. Jonathan Martin, who was a Sports Night producer, spoke in 2016 saying, "The Surtees sponsorship caused a flurry at management levels, not just for the BBC, which Martin was, but also for ITV and their producers as well, who also broadcast their occasional F1 races at the time. Back then, occasional races, not all the races. Grand Prix racing had already had a special place, and then when Durex appeared on the side of a car, which was the Surtees car, there were certain apoplectic people around." The Durex sponsorship deal caused a TV blackout not just for BBC and ITV in the UK but other broadcasters around the world. That led to blackouts for some media because they were thinking of the children at the time. Obviously it did not go down well in TV meetings and so on. That's why some broadcasters refused to broadcast races as a result of the Durex sponsorship on the Surtees. The non-championship Race of Champions did go ahead and was won by James Hunt in the McLaren. John Surtees did say that the London Rubber Company offered a decent sum of money. "I said we have to sit down and do it in a very wholesome and presentable way because of the Durex deal. Thought it would cause a stir, but the fact remains there was nothing sleazy about it and we weren't breaking any rules. We revitalised the team and gave it a second chance." Surtees was disappointed that the Durex sponsorship was so unpalatable. It was purely a question of the BBC making their decision. From the point of view of the sport, I was very unhappy. It was very important for the sport to be able to give it a good platform for people to support it. It didn't make Surtees happy that the BBC took the position. Surtees thought it was ill-advised considering so many government agencies were out pushing these products. And that was Surtees speaking in 2016. And it was the first big controversy of the 76th season. Round 3 of the season was at the United States Grand Prix West at Long Beach. Narrow street circuit and well known to IndyCars nowadays, but back then brand new to Formula 1. It was the first time since 1960 that an F1 race was in California. The 1960 United States Grand Prix was at Riverside in California, but this race at Long Beach was known as the United States Grand Prix West. Race organisers, headed by British businessman and Long Beach resident Chris Cook, could not have done a better job creating an American Monaco. Guests included 1967 world champion Denny Hulme, 3-time F1 champ Jack Brabham, 5-time F1 champ Juan Manuel Fangio were there. Dan Gurney was there, as was 1961 champion Phil Hill were in attendance. There was lots of great talk about the circuit, and in qualifying, Lauda set his pole time, then Hunt, and then Regazzoni set it on the pole, and then Patrick Lapie set it on second fastest, with Regazzoni on the pole. Due to safety concerns, FOCA, the Formula 1 Constructors Association, decided to limit the field to 20 starters for safety reasons. Because the narrow concrete canyons necessitated a street layout, 7 cars failed to qualify. ABC journalist and National Speed Sport News editor Chris Economaki spoke to Val Mitrovic and would later speak to Mario Andretti. Economaki said to Andretti, "How about this being your last race in Formula One?" Andretti responded, "What are you talking about?" Economaki said, "That's what Val Mitrovic told me." Andretti said, "It may have been his last Grand Prix, but it won't be mine." At the start of the race, Regazzoni rocketed away and set it into the lead ahead of Prix, Hunt and Lauda. Exiting the first turn, Vittorio Brembo's March squeezed Carlos Reutemann's Brabham into the wall, putting both cars out. Then on the curved back straight by the harbour, Gunnar Nielsen in the Lotus broke its rear suspension and went straight into the wall at 160 miles an hour. Nielsen escaped with only a stiff neck. Whilst that was going on, John Watson's Penske bumped Jacques Laffite to the from behind, breaking the nose on Watson's Penske. Laffite was spun around by contact and dropped to 8th to 14th. Lauda made his way past the Prix on lap 5 and took second. 7 seconds behind Regazzoni, who seemed untouchable. Andretti moved from 15th to 9th in the Parnelli and set fastest lap, but was finished when he lost water in the engine, although he didn't stop till lap 15 when the engine had completely cooked. But whilst that was going on, Hunt tried to get past the Prix, but the Prix shoved Hunt into the wall, putting Hunt out the race. And this was on lap 4, and for the rest of the race, Hunt shook his fist at the Prix each time the Frenchman came round. Around the same time as Andretti's retirement, the Prix spun and dropped from 3rd to 7th. Regazzoni was unstoppable, winning the race by well over 42 seconds on Lauda, with the Prix 3rd. And it was the last race of those cars under these current circumstances. More on that later. Former team manager Rob Walker said, "I think the creation of the Long Beach Grand Prix was the greatest achievement in motor racing this decade." After 3 rounds, Lauda led with 24 points. His closest challenger was Patrick Depailler Tyrrell on 10 points. Regazzoni's win led him to 9 points, and this is after 3 rounds, followed by the 2 McLarens of Mars on 7 points and Hunt on 6 points. And in the Constructors Championship, Ferrari led on 27 points. Remember, back then, it was your highest place car that took the points, rather than both cars. So Ferrari had 27 points, Tyrrell was second on 13, McLaren third on 9, followed by Shadow with 4 and March with 3, down all the way to Fittipaldi and Parnelli on 1 point each. At the Spanish Grand Prix, everyone was talking about the new regulation changes and the brand new Tyrrell P44, one of the few cars that raced as a 6-wheeled Formula 1 car. Only one of those P34s was available for Patrick Depailler. Depailler was 3rd behind Hunt, who was on pole, Lauda, who qualified 2nd but was in agony after broken ribs after an accident driving a tractor. But the new regulation changes included removing airboxes, width for the cars, and so on. At the start of the race, Hunt was beaten by Lauda off the line, with Depailler 3rd, but just before mid-race, Depailler spun off and crashed with brake problems. Just before the middle of the race, both Hunt and teammate Lachlan Mars in the McLarens found another gear and drove past Lauda. But towards the end of the race, Mars had to retire with an engine failure. Hunt won, with Lauda 2nd and Gunnar Nielsen in a Lotus 3rd. After the race, scrutineers examined the bulk of the field, and Hunt was disqualified because the McLaren found to be 1.5 centimetres too wide. Lauda was declared the winner. One of the new rules that came to force defined how wide a Formula 1 car could be, and it was purely the width of the rear tyres provided by Goodyear. 2 months after the race, McLaren's appeal was successful, and the 1.5 centimetre difference was minimal, and Hunt was reinstated as the winner of the Spanish Grand Prix. This is what the championship looked like after 4 rounds, but this was basically after Hunt's initial exclusion. Hunt was sitting on 6 points, Lauda was on 33. After successfully appealing the decision, Hunt was on 15 points, Lauda, who finished second, was on 30 points. And this were the points after Hunt was reinstated. The points looked like this after Hunt's initial exclusion, with Tyrrell on 13 behind Ferrari on 36, McLaren down on 9 points. And it went all the way down to 1 point. After a successful appeal, McLaren were up to second on 18 points, behind Ferrari on 33. So, could they make the difference, or could Ferrari keep a hold of the championship lead? The points were there all the way down to Fittipaldi on 1 point. Lauda won both the Belgium and Monaco Grand Prix, while Hunt failed to finish both of them. In Sweden, Dodi Scheckter took pole, but Mario Andretti in the Lotus led most of the way and retired. Scheckter in the Tyrrell took his only win of the year and the first for a 6-wheeled Formula 1 car, with the Prix second. Lauda was down in 3rd position, with Hunt down in 5th in a very uncompetitive McLaren, with Jacques Laffite ahead of him in 4th and Clay Rezzoni's Ferrari in 6th. After 7 rounds, Lauda led with 52 points. His nearest challenger, the Prix, was on 20, with Hunt and Scheckter tied on 17. These points are basically based on the point system after Hunt was reinstated. I'm not showing the original points before the reinstatement, so we're going to go on this basis. In the Constructors Championship, Ferrari led Tyrrell by 34 points after 7 rounds, with McLaren third on 23 points, all the way down to Parnelli with 1 point. Then it's to Paul Ricard for the French Grand Prix. Hunt still not happy with the car during practice, because it was the same setup that they've used since the Belgian Grand Prix, finally persuades McLaren to give him the settings that he had at the Spanish Grand Prix, except from the width of it, because they moved the oil colour and so on, but they've reverted back to the original settings, puts it on pole position ahead of Lauda by 0.28 seconds. But it was Lauda that got the jump at the start, but Lauda's engine blew after 8 laps, and Clay Rezzoni's Ferrari engine blew after 17 laps, leaving Hunt to win by 12 seconds over Dupier's Tyrrell and 23 seconds over John Watson's Penske. After winning in France, Hunt got upwards of 26 points. Still, half the gap remained between himself and Lauda. Dupire was still in contention, same number of points, but still hadn't won a race. Scheckter was 4th in the championship on 24 points, with Regazzoni behind on 16 and the West trailing. The Constructors Championship had Ferrari still leading, with Tyrrell catching up. And with McLaren winning, they were the big gainers. Ligier was fourth, with Lotus catching up in fifth and Penske in sixth. Then teams and drivers arrived at a heatwave in Brands Hatch for the British Grand Prix. Possibly one of the hottest summers on record, not just in Britain throughout the summer, but one of the most hottest races of the year, but also one of the most controversial races of the season. So, Lauda and Hunt were on the front row of the grid, and at the first corner, Clay Riggs only started fourth, made a lightning start, and attempted to take the lead from Lauda at the first corner, but made contact with Lauda, which resulted in a broken rear wheel on Lauda's car, and Riggs only spinning his own car and was hit by several of those cars, including Jacques Lafitte's Ligier and James Hunt's McLaren. Due to the amount of debris, the race was stopped. McLaren, Ferrari and Ligier set about preparing spare cars for Hunt, Riggs only and Lafitte, believing that the original cars can't be repaired in time. However, stewards announced no driver will be allowed to take part in a restart of the race unless their original car, which they finished the first lap of, unless they were in their original car, which they finished the first lap of the original race. That meant spare cars could not be used, and drivers had to return to the pits at the end of the first lap, would not be allowed to restart. Then there's a big hoo-ha. The McLaren mechanics managed to repair Hunt's damaged McLaren, which he had damaged in his original start. Despite him failing to complete the first lap, Hunt was now at least not in a replacement car. Hunt and Teddy Mayer, the head man of McLaren, were arguing their case with the stewards. Then, when they confirmed Hunt would not be able to take because of what was going on, a big eruption happened with the fans saying, "We want Hunt! We want Hunt!" And not only that, they were throwing beer cans, bottles, you name it, on the track, delaying the start further, allowing the McLaren mechanics to repair Hunt's car in time. Stewards, when entered, allowed Hunt to take the restart. Both Regazzoni and Lafitte also took the restart, but they were in spare cars, with the two teams opting to compete anyway and face possible exclusion after the race. At the second start, Lauda led the field with Hunt second, Regazzoni third and Scheckter fourth. And it was for 45 laps Lauda led, until gearshift problems allowed Hunt to overtake him and take the lead. For the rest of the race, Hunt continued to build up a lead from Lauda and crossed the line to victory. However, immediately following the race, Ferrari, Tyrrell and Kopsuka protested the results to the stewards. They believed Hunt had not completed a lap following the accident. Then, under the regulations, he should not have been allowed to take the restart. Following a 3-hour meeting, the officials dismissed the protests and announced that the original result would stand. Ferrari announced they would submit an appeal to the RAC, the governing body of motorsport in Britain, who were responsible for sanctioning and organised the British Grand Prix. On the 4th of August, a meeting was held where Ferrari put forward their view that Hunt did not complete a lap and therefore should not be permitted to take part in the restart, explaining their reason for dismissing the appeal. The RAC stated although Hunt did not finish the lap, his car was still moving at the time the race was stopped, and that was sufficient to allow him to restart. Angry about this, Ferrari protested the results to the FIA, which resulted in a tribunal being heard to hear Ferrari's appeal. It was on the 25th of September. They believed Hunt's car had been pushed by his mechanics before the race had been halted, breaking the regulation prohibiting outside assistance during the race. McLaren maintained they had only pushed the car after the race had been stopped. The decision reached by the tribunal was to disqualify Hunt from the race and declare Niki Lauda the race winner. That in turn moved everyone up a spot, with Scheckter second, Watson third, Tom Price fourth, and Jones fifth, and Emerson Fittipaldi in sixth position. That enraged not just Hunt but McLaren. Prior to Hunt's exclusion, the championship standings were 35 to Hunt versus 58 to Lauda, with the two Tyrrells of Scheckter and Prix on 28 and 26 points still mathematically in contention for the championship. After Ferrari's appeal to the FIA, which Hunt was excluded from the British Grand Prix, Lauda led on 61 points to Jody Scheckter's 30 points. Hunt was down in third position, equalled with Patrick Depaille's Tyrrell. In the original standings, it was Ferrari versus Tyrrell, 61 plays 41, with McLaren third on 40 points, with Ligier fourth on 10 points, Penske fifth on 9, and Lotus sixth on 8 points. After Hunt was excluded, the Constructors Championship looked like with Ferrari leading with 64 points, followed by Tyrrell on 43 points and McLaren on 32 points, with Ligier and Penske on 10 points each, followed by Lotus on 8 points. Then the Formula 1 circus went to the Nürburgring in Germany. The old Nürburgring, which was run on the Nordschleife, was considered to be most challenging and demanding purpose-built circuit in the world. Measuring at 14.2 miles, which is 22.8 kilometres, it was by far the longest circuit on the calendar, and because it was built on the Eiffel Mountains, it had over 1,000 feet, 300 metres of elevation change. Although slightly remodelled back in 1971, it still remained much of the character that led to former world champion and then ABC announcer Jackie Stewart to nickname it the Green Hell. The circuit's extraordinary size needed at least 5 times the number of marshals and medical support as almost any other Grand Prix to properly maintain it, something the German organisers were unable to provide. Additionally, by its very nature, it was impossible to upgrade it to the increased safety standards of the 70s. It was narrow, had very few one-off areas, and numerous sections were nearly inaccessible to fire marshals. Very bumpy at a number of points, including footpaths and flat scarring. The cars could actually become airborne. The sheer size of the circuit also meant the weather and track conditions around it could vary wildly, with some sections dry and others wet, making a safe choice of tyre difficult or impossible to do. 2 weeks before the Grand Prix, a fatal accident at footpaths had occurred during practice for a Formula Super V race. According to Autosport, 131st fatality at the Nürburgring in its 49-year history. It was also unsuitable for television. The sheer size made it all but impossible to cover a race there. For those reasons, it was decided before 1976 that it would be the last German Grand Prix held on the old Nürburgring and the last on the Nordschleife section. Defending world champion Niki Lauda, who was the points leader, was not impressed with safety conditions on the circuit, especially since the forecast called for rain. He arranged for a drivers' meeting and gave his view. However, Hunt did say that if the race was cancelled, Lauda would become automatically world champion. However, that led to drivers divided, and the drivers' vote was for the race to go ahead. Lauda lost by 1 vote. and the race went ahead. Although there was a bit of hoo-ha as well in the paddock, Jackie Hicks was fired from Wolf Williams Racing. And not only that, the WAM team had their Brabham BT-44s impounded by local police because of legal action by their former driver Loris Kessel. Wolf Stomlin, who was slated to drive the WAM and Brabham, was transferred to a Works Brabham instead. And Lola Lombardi was left without a drive. Fans were wondering if Niki Lauda could repeat the under 7 minute lap, but that led to laps being over 7 minutes, with Hunt on pole followed by Lauda. The weather turned to wet before the race, and most drivers started on wet tyres. The only one that chose not to go on wets and stayed on slicks was Jochen Mass in the second McLaren. Having had so much experience at the Nürburgring, not just in F1 but in sports cars, and expecting a change for better weather, decided to use dry weather tyres at the start. At the start, Regazzoni took the lead while both Hunt and Lauda fell back. Hunt took second, Maas was third, fourth was the fleet who took advantage of the fact that Hans-Joachim Stutzgar was pushed off the grid with a clutch problem, although the German started at the back of the grid. In the course of the first lap, Regazzoni spun and dropped to fourth. At the end of the lap, the weather changed back to dry, and most drivers pitted for dry tyres. At the end of the first lap, Mass led with Ronnie Peterson, who was still on wet tyres, second. And during that first lap pit stop, most guys, including Hunt, Lauda and so on, pitting. Hunt got out and way okay, whereas Lauda had to wait because of a slow pit stop. At the end of lap 2, Mass was in front with Gunnar Nilsson's Lotus, who had not stopped and still on wet tyres, in second, with Hunt being the first dry weather winner in third. Whilst on the second lap, Lauda had changed, basically make up the lost time. And basically what had happened was that his rear suspension gave way on Bergberg's left-hand corner and spun him through the fence and into the aft bank and bounced him back onto the track, enveloping in flames. Guy Edwards avoided the wreck, but Howard Ertel and Brett Lunger both hit Lauda's car. All three drivers stopped and tried to get Lauda at the flames. They were joined by Otto Mazzari, who stopped his Wolf Williams, and he got Lauda out. Lauda had suffered serious burns and was rushed by helicopter to the Bunsen Rear Hospital in Koblenz. From there, where he was flown to the trauma clinic in Lustgarten, home of Germany's most advanced burn ward at the time, where he fought for his life in the next few days. Most cars assembled at the crash site, being unable to pass by the now stricken Lauda's car. Only 20 of the 24 starters remained. Chris Seaman decided not to start the race again. The rain had gone, and Hunt passed Regazzoni, Scheckter, Depay and Pace to take the lead for good when the race restarted. At the footplots, Peterson lost control of his march and crashed heavily, while Regazzoni spun off again and Depay went off, avoiding the Ferrari. And it was Hunt that went on to win, ahead of Scheckter and Mass in third, with Pace fourth, Nilsson fifth and Wolf Stomlin in the Brabham in sixth position. And it was basically the last ever race on the Nordschleife before they used the Grand Prix circuit 8 years later. During the hospital section for Lauda, He was conscious and stand immediately after the accident, but he later lapsed into a coma. While in hospital, he was given last rites. Somehow, Lauda survived and recovered whilst at home, but would have to miss the following 2 rounds at the Österreich Ring in Austria, which was Lauda's home race, and the Dutch Grand Prix at Zandvoort. Lauda suffered extensive scarring from the burns to his head. Most of his right ear was lost, as well as the hair on the right side of his head, as well as his eyebrows and eyelids. He chose to limit reconstructive surgery to replacing the eyelids and getting them to work properly. After the accident, Lauda always wore a cap to cover the scars on his head. He arranged for sponsors to use the cap for advertising, not just from Italy onwards, but in his personal life as well. In a 2015 interview about the Nürburgring wreck, Lauda said there was basically two or three drivers trying to get me out of the car, but one was Ettore Mazzario, the Italian guy, who also had to stop there at the scene because I blocked the road, and he really came into the car himself and triggered my seatbelts loose and then pulled me out. It was unbelievable how he could do that, and I met him afterwards and said, how could you do that? Honestly, I do not know. But to open your seatbelts was so difficult because you were pushing so hard against it, and when it was open, I got you out of the car like a feather. And that was Lauda speaking in 2015 about the Nürburgring wreck that he endured in 1976. Ferrari elected to boycott the Austrian Grand Prix because of not just the accident involving Niki Lauda at the Nürburgring, but because of favouritism towards McLaren at the Spanish and British Grand Prix, although the result of the British Grand Prix would not be reversed to mid-September. In Austria, Hunter qualified on the pole, but would finish 4th, as John Watson, driving for Team Penske, would win. It was Watson's first career win, and the only time that Team Penske won a Grand Prix, and the last for an American constructor. At Zandvoort, Holland, for the Dutch Grand Prix, Ferrari were back, but they had Clay Regazzoni in their car. Ronnie Peterson took pole, but both he and Watson were passed by Hunt, and Hunt had a race-long duel with Watson that led to Watson's retirement. Hunt would go on to win on his 29th birthday. After 12 rounds, Lauda led Hunt by 14 points, with Jody Scheckter still an outside chance on 38 points. Although a 23-point gap, it was mathematically doable. The Prix and Regazzoni were now out of contention. John Watson's victory put him in 6th position in the championship, ahead of Lafitte's Ligier and Mass's McLaren. The Constructors Championship after 12 rounds had Ferrari lead McLaren by 12 points, with Tyrrell 1 point behind McLaren. Penske's win in Austria with John Watson driving allowed him to go to 4th, ahead of Ligier, who were tying for 5th with Lotus. After missing 2 races, Lauda was back, appearing at a Monza press conference 6 weeks after the accident, with his fresh burn still bandaged. F1 journalist Nigel Roebuck recalls seeing Lauda in the pits peeling the blood-soaked bandages off this scalp. He also wears specially adapted crash helmets so it won't be in too much discomfort. But there was yet another scandal. James Hunt, Joachim Maas, both in McLarens, along with John Watson's Penske, qualified 8th, 9th and 10th. But after qualifying, The cars that suited Hunt's and Mass's fuel, which was Texaco fuel, we tested apparently legal. Their cars and those of Watson Penske were judged to have contained a higher octane level than allowed. Both teams were forced to had their times disallowed from Saturday, but three drivers that basically could have gone ahead and raced but chose not to: Brett Lunger, Autorio Mazzario and Otto Sutman were advanced into the field. Stuppen had left the circuit, Mazzario withdrew, and then later Guy Edwards decided to withdraw as well, so in order to make sure Hunt, Mass and Watson were able to race. But there was a surprise at the front of the grid: Jacques Lafitte's Ligier Matra on the pole ahead of Schecter's Tyrrell. A dice-long battle throughout the race, but it was Ronnie Peterson, out of nowhere, who started 8th on the grid, went on to win the race ahead of Regazzoni's Ferrari and Lafitte's Ligier. Lauda started 5th but managed to finish 4th, but did it slowly but conservatively. Hunt, meanwhile, made on a massive charge, but then basically spun on a gravel track while trying to take Tom Price's shadow, and the atmosphere was so bad for Hunt and McLaren that they left immediately afterwards. The Drivers' Championship looked like after Monza, with Lauda gaining 3 points on title rival Hunt. 64 played 47. Jody Scheckter got 2 points, which catapulted him up to 40 points. Mathematically, Hunt and Scheckter were still in the championship race, and it was just them three when they left Europe. Clay Regazzoni's second place catapulted him up to 28 points, ahead of Depailler on 27. Lafitte's third place catapulted him up to 20 points, ahead of Watson. Ronnie Peterson's victory at Monza catapulted him up to 10 points, but would be ahead of Tom Price and Gunnar Nielsen on countback. The Constructors Championship after Monza led Ferrari with 76 points. Tyrrell got past McLaren after McLaren non-scored, with 53 playing 52 between Tyrrell and McLaren, albeit Tyrrell were 23 points behind Ferrari. Ligier were 4th after Lafitte's 3rd place, which jumped them ahead of Team Penske, and March were 6th after Peterson's victory on 17 points, which leaked them ahead of Lotus. So heading into Canada, Lauda had the first big opportunity to clinch the 76 championship. If he won the race, he was champion. If Lauda finished 2nd, he needed Hunt and Scheckter lower than 3rd. If Lauda finished 3rd, Hunt and Scheckter needed to be 5th or lower. If Lauda finished 4th, Hunt and Scheckter needed to be 6th or lower. If Lauda finished 5th, Hunt and Scheckter would need to have a non-score. For Hunt to keep the championship live in the USA, he needed to finish ahead of Scheckter and Lauda, even if Scheckter and Lauda non-scored. If Scheckter was to keep his championship alive, he needed potentially a win, Lauda non-scoring, and Hunt to have at least a 2nd place to keep the championship alive. If all three failed to finish, Scheckter would be eliminated from the championship battle. Lauda and Hunt would fight it out in America, where it would still be 17 points heading in to the USA. Heading into the Canadian Grand Prix, Hunt got the news that he was excluded from Brands Hatch for the British Grand Prix, and the 17-point gap that he has got now, where it was 5 points. So it went down from 5 to 17. In qualifying, it was Hunt ahead of Peterson, with Lauda 6th on the grid, and Scheckter on the third row, 7th fastest. At the start, Peterson took the lead, ahead of Hunt and Brambilla in the march. Hunt took the lead on lap 10, and then had the race-long duel with the Prix still, but Hunt managed to fend off the Prix, with Andretti third, Scheckter fourth, Mass fifth, and Clay Regazzoni in sixth. Lauda was down in 8th place. The Drivers' Championship after the Canadian Grand Prix had Lauda non-score, but Hunt, who went on to win, gained 9 points, which takes him up to 56. But Lauda was still on 64, so Lauda led by 8 points. Schechter's 4th place mathematically meant he was out of the championship. The Prix was 4th on the standings with 33, followed by Regazzoni on 29, with Lafitte 6th on 20 and Watson 7th on 19, with Jochen Mass on 16 points in 8th place. The Constructors Championship looked very different, and it was Ferrari ahead of McLaren by 16 points. Mathematically, Ferrari could clinch it in America, but McLaren were 2 points ahead of Tyrrell, with Ligier 4th, tied with Lotus. Penske were 6th on 19, with March on 17, Shadow 8th on 10 points, followed by Brabham in 9th on 9 points, with Surtees on 4 points, Fittipaldi on 3 points, Ensign on 2 points, and Parnelli, which had been folded after Long Beach, on 1 point. Mathematically, Lauda could win the championship in the USA if he won the race. If Lauda finished second, Hunt needed to be third. If Lauda finished third, Hunt needed to be fifth. If Lauda finished fourth, Hunt needed to be sixth or lower. If Lauda finished fifth, Hunt needed to non-score. For Hunt to keep the championship alive, he needed to finish ahead of Lauda. But if both drivers failed to finish, it would go down to the finale at Fuji Speedway in Japan, with Lauda leading by 8 points. Lauda led by 8 points heading into Watkins Glen in the USA, but he could win the title. In the USA, Hunt qualified on pole. Lauda was 5th. And in the race, Hunt lost the lead at the start to Jody Schechter's Tyrrell, with Scheckter being 2.5 seconds ahead after 5 laps. After being held up by Vittorio Brambill's March for 4 laps, Lauda moved into third, 5.8 seconds behind Hunt. There was a battle for fourth between Brambilla, Ronnie Peterson's March, Jacques Lafitte's Ligier, Carlos Pace's Brabham, John Watson's Penske, and Clay Regazzoni's Ferrari, Mario Andretti's Lotus, and Jochen Mass's McLaren. And Joachim Stuck, who qualified 6th, suffered a second crash on the grid but was working his way forward and reached the end of the group. And then on lap 15, Jack Hicks's Ensign went wide in turn 6, a left-handed entering the Enville section of the course, known as the boot among the spectators, and hit Danko Bauer head-on. The nose went under the bottom rail and the car split in two. Rear section spun back onto the track in flames. Hicks stepped out of the wreckage of the cockpit and hobbled to the grass. Ray collapsed with injuries to both his legs and ankles. Emerson Fittipaldi, who had followed him, said it was the worst accident he had ever seen, and could hear the explosion of the car hitting the barrier above his engine and through his helmet and earplugs. John Watson slowed briefly for the wreck but was passed by Regazzoni and Mass before he got back up to full speed, putting him back to 9th. Schechter's Tyrrell was losing grip when his fuel load lightened, and Hunt was getting quicker in the chasing McLaren. It close to 1.3 seconds and in half a second. On lap 37, Hunt moved on the inside of the backstretch and took lead. And on lap 41, he missed a gear. trying to in the chicane trying to get around some back markers, and W took the lead. Hunt passed him again on the end of lap 46 and held on to gain his 6th win of the season. So Hunt went on to win his 6th race of the season, and on lap 53 Hunt set the fastest lap of the race. Lauda struggled with oversteer on hard tyres in the cold, barely beat Hunt's teammate Jochen Mass to the line to keep 3rd place. After the race, Lauda removed his helmet to reveal a balaclava soaked in blood. The Drivers' Championship, Lauda led Hunt by 3 points heading into the Japanese Grand Prix, so it was going to go down to the wire. Jody Scheckter was 3rd on 49, Depailler 4th on 33, with the rest trailing in the dust in the Drivers' Championship. In the Constructors, Ferrari went on to win the Constructors Championship at the Glen with Lauda's 3rd place. McLaren were 2nd at the moment at that stage with 70, with Tyrrell 5 points behind in 3rd. Penske, Ligier and Lotus were all on 20 points, with March on 19 and the rest trailing behind. In between the United States and Japanese Grand Prix, where the Japanese Grand Prix will be the season finale at a brand new venue at Fuji, McLaren team manager Asda Caldwell had taken advantage of the gap to hire the Fuji circuit out for an exclusive McLaren test, but all the other teams did not know. After a few laps, the gearbox seized, bringing the test to a premature close, but the team had the advantage of acclimatising themselves to the new circuit. Obviously, that meant other teams had the massive disadvantage. There was lots of tension, and the championship permutations in Japan looked like this. For Niki Lauda, if he won the race, he was champion. Lauda needed to finish 3rd if Hunt finished 2nd to be champion. If Lauda finished 4th or 5th, Hunt needed to be 3rd for Lauda to be champion. If Lauda finished 6th, Hunt needed to be 4th or lower, and if Hunt finished 5th or lower, Lauda needed a non-score. For Hunt, if he won the race, he was champion. Hunt finished 2nd with Lauda 4th or lower, Hunt finished 3rd with Lauda 6th or lower, and if Hunt finished 4th with Lauda non-scoring, that would still be enough. But if they were drawn on points, Hunt would win on countback. So if Lauda finished 2nd behind Hunt, Hunt would win on countback. Obviously, if Hunt finished 2nd with Lauda 4th, Hunt finished 3rd with Lauda 6th, and if Hunt finished 4th with Lauda non-scoring, Hunt would obviously take it on the tiebreaker, because he would have more wins to Lauda's, as Hunt had 6 wins to Lauda's 5. Everybody expected Hunt versus Lauda to be a very good showdown in Japan, but Hunt must have been worn out after bedding 35 British Airways hostesses at the Tokyo Hilton Hotel on the one up to the race. In qualifying, Hunt and Lauda had to make do with 2nd and 3rd, with Mario Andretti on pole in the Lotus. But on race day, it was very wet with fog and running water at several places of the track. Intense debate as to whether the race should be started decided to go ahead. Majority of drivers did not disagree. Race start was delayed around an hour and a half. At the start, Hunt took the lead with Watson 2nd, Andretti 3rd. On the 2nd lap, Watson slid down in escape mode. Andretti took 2nd, but Lauda drove into the pits to withdraw. Believed the weather conditions made the track too dangerous. He later said, "My life is worth more than a title." And he also revealed that he couldn't blink and his eyes were watering excessively because of the fire-damaged tear ducts as a result of the Nürburgring crash. Hunt then continued to lead, with second place battle between Andretti and Bambier, and then Bambier caught up to Hunt, tried to pass but spun, retiring 15 laps later with electrical problems. Joachim Maas, who was a teammate of Hunt's, moved in second before crashing out on the 36th lap, when he was basically acting as the team support for Hunt. Seemed like an easy win for Hunt, but the track began to dry. First lost position to Andretti and then to Dupaille, but then Dupaille basically had a puncture, and then Hunt had two flat tyres at the front. The McLaren mechanics had to lift the car in order physically to lift the car because basically they couldn't get the jacks on. With new tyres fitted in, Hunt rejoined in 5th position, behind Dupaille in 4th and Jones 3rd in the Surtees and Clay Regazzoni 2nd in the Ferrari. Hunt and Dupaille got past Jones and Regazzoni. Jones would later pass Regazzoni, and it was Andretti that won by a lap from Dupaille in 2nd. Hunt finished 3rd, became world champion. Jones finished 4th, Regazzoni 5th, and Gunnar Nielsen 6th in the other Lotus. Hunt thought that he had lost the title, but the McLaren mechanics told him, "You're 3rd, you're champion." And afterwards, when Hunt spoke to ITV TV host Dickie Davis, "What are your plans tonight?" Hunt said, "Go and get drunk." And basically, an interesting week, basically, because as I said earlier, Hunt was involved with 30 air hostesses, and I will leave the link below about that bit. And it was an amazing end to a really controversial and dramatic season. After 16 rounds going through South America, North America, Africa, Europe and Asia, it was Hunt that beat Lauda to the title by 1 point. Scheckter was 3rd, with lots of great drives from several drivers throughout 1976. In the Constructors Championship, Ferrari obviously clinched the title in America, but it was McLaren that was 2nd ahead of Tyrrell by 3 points. Lotus were 4th, having passed Penske and Ligier to it. Penske finished ahead of Ligier thanks to Watson's win in Austria. Ligier were winless. March finished 7th ahead of Shadow and Brabham. Surtees was 9th, actually 10th, my mistake. Surtees finished 10th, ahead of Fittipaldi, Ensign and Parnay. Obviously the Japanese Grand Prix was covered on UK TV. BBC and ITV finally relented and basically had to put up with Durex condom sponsorship on the Surtees cars. But seeing Hunt win the title made them realise that it was important to broadcast. BBC would later take over from 78 to 96, ITV from 97 to 08, and then BBC 9 to 11 before sharing the rights with Sky from 2012 to 2015, and then Sky would share the rights with Channel 4 since 2016. Niki Lauda would have a second world title in 1977, but retire at the end of 1979, disillusioned with Brabham, but then came back to McLaren in 1982, won the title in 84, but retired at the end of 85, would later manage Jaguar, and then help Mercedes to the success since 2014, but we don't know about this year. But Lauda would lose his life in 2019. Hunt, on the other hand, retired at the end of 1979, but would strike a good commentary duo with Murray Walker at the BBC. Hunt would sadly lose his life in 1993 after a heart attack, just after commentating on the Canadian Grand Prix. This 1976 season was basically done in a movie called Rush. It's worth watching Obviously there's some naughty bits and some swearing, but it's certainly worth watching because you would certainly enjoy it. I'm Gareth Thomas and this is Classic Motorsport Podcasts. Remember, like, share and subscribe for more great content. Goodbye.